been hard to put together something that's understandable without sitting with people and without going into a lot of detail, but I'm going to do my best here to talk about SLAM. um, so it goes back to dependency injection and why do we use it? What's it for? The Patrick's theory. Well, I think that generally people have used it for unit testing. And aside from that, kind of a feel good, if you will. In fact, the last contract I had, they had me do inversion of control just for the sake of it, not for any purpose. But there are a lot of downsides to it. It certainly increases the complexity of the code. It makes it very difficult to navigate from a developer's perspective using the tools that we use daily. And oftentimes we see mock interfaces going into production code, which don't add a lot of performance problems, but could add problems. I mean, why extra code, right? So, not a huge fan of dependency injection, except, for particular purposes. I have to say, we used it when I designed MEF, which is a component of .NET, because we did it for Visual Studio extensibility. And in that case, you want people to be able to inject different stuff to do different things, like change the editor or add their own tool. That's why you would want to use it. It's not necessarily a great pattern for applications, if you will. So we see that the use of dependency injection in interfaces and the proliferation of interfaces for unit testing. And I'll say I discovered difficulty in unit testing the Salesforce code base on my first ticket. It was, I think, perhaps total of a 30-minute fix to get the ticket done, and then some 3 weeks later, I'm still working on unit test. And it was Tony who actually said, "Hey, don't you wish we could?" And so I thought, I think we might be able to. So I tapped some resources of mine, and I started digging, and sure enough, some good things and fun things are possible. So what I produced was SLAM, and I did this on my own time. Don't worry, I did not do it on your dime. I think that's been a point of confusion. But it essentially allows a developer to change the methods of existing DLLs running or not, and including converting private to public. So if I wanted to, for example, change mock, if you will, the way a method behaves, I can simply write that method and inject it into the DLL without modifying any code whatsoever. And that is the key thing here. But it certainly has more applications. I mean, imagine being able to inject a hotfix into production to test it out, and the ability to revert it instantly if you're not happy with that. Then there's other stuff that I developed along the way that I think will find quite useful. But it is, think of it as dependency injection without all the riffraff, if you will. And it seriously reduces the amount of code you have to write when you first write the code, and completely eliminates all the nonsense you have to write for creating mock interfaces, because it is this simple. With a single line of code, any one or all the methods of a class can be replaced. So here is my line, and I simply slam a class with the replacement of my mock class. Then anytime my source class is called, whatever methods were in my mock class are called instead. It's that simple, but it's very powerful.
All right, I'm actually going to start with the end of the unit tests with a little bit of a tease, somewhat because it's kind of not working, but with a system as large as Salesforce, it's very difficult to tell exactly what's going on at any given time. And as you'll see as we evolve through these presentations, the use of these default injectors that you see there, where I'm simply logging a message saying hello world, allows me to redirect output aside from the debug output window, if you will, which is usually littered with tons and tons of output, so it's difficult to discern. And again, this will become much more obvious in its use as we evolve the presentation. So I'll leave it at that. and I'll move on to SLAM. All right, so I talked a bit about patterns for pattern's sake. And do we really get use out of them? Well, for unit testing, you kind of need the pattern that is used in Salesforce, and it's fairly commonly used in quote modern code bases. And whether it's implemented via an interface or an abstract, if I have a source class and I want to be able to override it, there's usually this factory pattern that's used where I'll create the abstract class for the source class that describes the function, and then I'll create a source class factory that can get that source class, and then I have to go and implement the concrete versions of each of those and actually implement the function as well as the concrete implementation of the factory. And then when I want to use it, the code becomes, well, I'll say complex. I say it's complex because you see I'm already to lines and lines of code when I just want to return the date time. And so, and if when I want to use it, I'll have to create probably a processor that takes an initialization of the factory and then creates the factory. And oh my gosh, really? Are we going to do it this way? Well, these patterns exist in the world. They exist in Salesforce. And although there's a somewhat simpler interface implementation version of it, it's not too much different. And then, of course, navigating the code becomes ridiculous. I say go to definition, and I get the abstract class. Well, what the heck's going on? It just becomes quite a burden. Why would we want to do all that when there exists another option? So let's return this thing back to basics. Let's strip out all this extra code and return my class to its simple static form. Now, let's see, we make it public. We'll remove the overrides. And I'm going to create a mock class, if you will. It's going to return something a little different from the time. That's all I have to do in order to support dependency injection for unit testing. And what we'll see is and I'm using this injector again, and it's going to fail on me, but you'll see more later, I hope. I'm going to run the injection on that class, and then I'll show the value, and now shows it's time to get ill. Shows it twice, but that's the bug. So I hope that's helpful for understanding at least the basics of what's happening here. And I have at least 3 or 4 more videos to show you, but I thought to keep them simple and to not hog your entire morning or evening, I would start slow. Thanks.